Hi and welcome to our presentation. We are Soledad, Karen Alfaro, Saray Burgos, and Sofía Millán. In this video, we will describe the different aspects of sociolinguistic variation with the help of researches on its contribution to the acquisition of a second language.
Throughout the evolution of society, language has been one of the tools that has progressed with the human need to communicate. And as is well known, this necessity to transmit ideas, thought, and knowledge has overcome the obstacle posed by the difference in languages used by speakers of different origins. Thanks to the emergence of English as a lingua franca, people around the world with different mother tongues are able to establish relationships and expand their culture. In this way, important unions between countries with different language have been achieved, evidenced in treaties, commerce, and even political ideologies. Because of this, English is considered a value instrument, and for this reason, it has been strongly introduced in the educational area of non-English speaking countries in order to promote its acquisition as a second language. By virtue of this, every day, new variations in language are generated, and of course, different authors have worked on the subject. Among these, we can find the Faculty of English as a Lingua Franca, Linguistic Structure of a Second Language Learning, Social Factor Related, and the Sociolinguistic Approach and its contribution in this field. As a consequence, the question arises: how does research on sociolinguistic variation contribute to second language acquisition? In the first place, it is important to be cognizant of the fact that English as a lingua franca, that is used around the world as the predominant language among speakers whose native language is distinct from English, goes through 3 cycles of English, classifies word Englishes in 3 categories. First, English as a native language. Second, English as a second language. And third, English as a foreign language. Considering all English speakers do not have the same linguistic common ground when referring to English as a lingua franca, it does not matter which cycle the speakers come from. Everyone must modify and alter their own variation of English in order to have an intelligible communication among every participant. In terms of sociolinguistic, Jenkins also mentioned that ELF is a mutual negotiation involving effort and adjustment from all parties. Therefore, speakers tend to adjust their form of speech, such as repeating themselves, paraphrasing, and code switching. The role that English teachers perform should be inclusive, taking into consideration every variety of English and the students' different sociolinguistic background.
As said previously, sociolinguistic variations are based on 2 factors. On one hand, we have the linguistic structures, and on the other, we have the social factors. First, we're going to review the importance of the linguistic structures when we are learning a second language. These linguistic structures contemplate grammar, phonetics, phonology, and all the different underlying structural rules of a language. In our research about linguistic variations in the acquisition of a second language, studies focused on what the acquisition of a second language is, both within the classroom and outside of it, such as the study made by Moujon and Dewell in 2004, which contemplated Irish students who were instructed to learn French. Research conducted within the classroom focused on how students are instructed to learn the formality of the target language, which is given by different markers in its morphology, and can be identified by students when studied, but makes it more complex to apply when interacting with a native speaker, orally or in written form. Howard, in 2004, explains that in order for the second language learner to identify which form or formality needs to be used, they rely on their previous sociolinguistic knowledge to fluctuate between the two variants of formality depending on the context. Subsequently, the informality in their speech would help them in their coexistence with native speakers' advances, as said by Regan in 1996. Another study we reviewed was the one by Britain in 1992, which focused on a New Zealander variety of English, also called New Zealand English, and it delved on the change of intonation in declarative sentences, where speakers apply an upwards inflection in pitch towards the end of the sentence. This is usually found in interrogative sentences, such as questions. An example of this would be instead of saying, "This was a good soup," with the high rising intonation, it would sound more like, "This was a good soup." This phenomenon can also be found in other inner-circled world Englishes, such as in Canada or the United States. Oftentimes, this high-rising intonation is portrayed as a lack of confidence and insecurity about what is being said. However, multiple studies suggest that this inflection is a result of seeking verification of the listener's comprehension. In brief, being able to identify all these different changes in the target language's linguistic structures is an essential point for second language learners in order to have a correct understanding of the foreign language. It is also very important for the students to develop a sociolinguistic competence to identify these changes.
But in addition to all that, there is another approach that also requires attention, and is the presence of different social distinctions involved in the acquisition and use of a second language. And here is a quote. According to Gisling and Long, for second language speakers and native speakers alike, the way we say things give hints about who we are. We reveal characteristics of our age, gender, social class, ethnicity, and so on, each time we produce language. So, within language expressions, there is more than the communication of a message. As we saw, it is possible to find speaker traits that go beyond the language itself, and that are necessarily involved with the social context where second language acquisition takes place. In 1982, Spolsky proposed the number of speakers condition, which states, basically, that the greater the number of speakers of a language around, the greater the desire and possibility of learning it. This means that if a speaker has an environment in which the language that is intended to learn is used frequently, then there will be a higher chance to learn it thanks to the social setting, compared to someone who does not have the same possibility. And if you think about that, it is a clear issue directly related to the speaker's social class and community. Along with this, it is necessary to consider the difference created by gender between speakers, which also manifests itself when acquiring a second language. According to these authors, there are distinctions in the way men and women speak, mainly in the focus on their speech as well as the way they develop it. And particularly in the classroom, it is evident that interactions are dominated by boys over girls, and this situation is often reinforced by educators, who tend to pay more attention to male opinions than female ones. In the context of learning, the same authors also mention that there is a significant relationship between age and the difficulty in acquiring a new language. They state that there is a brain process caused by the onset of puberty, which makes L2 learning to become more complicated as the year goes by. This is because the human brain loses the ability to acquire knowledge quickly and efficiently, and therefore making use of a different language becomes more complicated for adults who are just starting to learn compared to children. So, it is important to pay attention to these differences, not only if you are a man or woman, but also if you are older or younger. These factors, although they present a major difficulty to the access of learning a second language, should be seen as a substantial material to create better techniques to support people to learn, and not to remain as a limitation. In this way, we can all learn a second language.
In addition to this, according to Sidham and other authors in 2019, second language learners often have difficulties producing an appropriate sociolinguistic speech in authentic situations. That is, the ability to recognize and produce contextually appropriate language. Variationist researchers have convincingly argued that the ability to change styles appropriately and consistently according to different social contexts is one aspect of the sociolinguistic competence that students need to acquire. Likewise, in the context of the acquisition of a second language, it is fundamental to highlight the importance of studying sociolinguistic variation, since it helps to understand the competencies of students in intercultural or speech actions. Thus, there are two supposed basic studies of sociolinguistic variation in the acquisition of the second language. First, the variation between languages is very systematic rather than random. Secondly, the variation between languages is an entity that shares the same status and is, to some extent, independent of the first and second languages of the students. For example, in the same studies, it was discovered that students produce more specific variants in situations where they were able to control their speech, namely lists of reading words and fewer specific forms in situations where they were less able to control their speech, such as freedom of expression. To conclude, this research has responded considerably to the contribution of the investigation of linguistic variations. The main answer given is that it is of utmost importance to consider the variance of language when learning and teaching a second language. Variationist researchers clarify that the social context surrounding students of a second language is a crucial aspect to consider when teaching a foreign language. Likewise, it is the author's opinion that sociolinguistic variations must be considered by educators who teach a second language, given that these factors have a significant influence on students' learning processes. In this way, The focus is to consider the students' backgrounds, their social contacts, and their relationship with them. Thus, when teaching a second language, particularly English, the review of sociolinguistic variation is as important as grammatical structures, phonetics, morphology, among others, all in order to provide the students need to have an intelligible and assertive form to communicate in their new language.
Thanks a lot for your attention. If you want to know more about this, don't forget to check the information on TED Ed. Bye!